In 1875, a woman ran through a Nebraska storm, not from the lightning, but from the men who claimed they owned her. Clara Hayes had two choices: die in the wilderness or trust a stranger. She chose the door. What she found inside that cabin would either save her life or end it. This is the story of a cowboy who stepped back when she was afraid, and the promise that changed everything. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The rain came down like nails. Clara Hayes stumbled through the tall grass, her boots sinking into mud with every desperate step. The Nebraska plains stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and featureless under the roiling sky. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating nothing but more emptiness, more distance between her and any hope of shelter. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. Behind her, somewhere in that storm, they were coming. She could still hear her stepfather's voice echoing in her mind from 3 hours ago, cold and final. "You'll marry Dawson tomorrow, girl. Your mother's gone. You got no say anymore." Harold Brennan wasn't her father. He never had been. He'd married her mother 5 years ago, when Clara was 17, brought them to his ranch outside Kearney, and slowly turned their lives into something small and suffocating. Her mother had grown quiet, then sick, then dead. Clara had found the letters 2 weeks after the funeral, hidden in her stepfather's office, written in her mother's shaking hand. Letters begging for help. Letters describing fear. And one final letter, never sent, that made Clara's blood run cold. "He's poisoning me. I know it now. If you find this, Clara, run." She'd run tonight. Harold had 3 ranch hands loyal to him. Men who followed orders without question, men who wouldn't hesitate to drag her back. When she'd overheard him finalizing the marriage arrangement with Marcus Dawson, a man twice her age with a reputation for cruelty, something inside her snapped. She'd waited until the house went dark, stuffed what little she could carry into a saddlebag, and slipped out through the kitchen. She'd made it maybe 5 miles before the storm hit. Another 2 before her horse spooked at the thunder and threw her. The animal had bolted into the darkness, leaving her alone with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bag clutched against her chest. That was an hour ago, maybe more. Time had lost meaning. Now there was only the rain, the wind, and the terrible certainty that she couldn't run much farther. Clara crested a low rise and stopped, gasping, pressing one hand against the stitch in her side. Water streamed down her face, plastering her dark hair against her skull. Her dress was soaked through, heavy as iron, clinging to her legs. Lightning flashed again. And there, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a structure. Small. Square. A cabin. Hope surged through her exhausted body like fire. She half ran, half stumbled down the slope toward it, her vision blurring from rain and fatigue. As she got closer, details emerged: rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, a single window glowing faintly with lamplight. Someone was home. Clara's steps faltered. She stood there in the rain, 10 feet from the door, terror warring with desperation. A stranger lived here. A man, most likely. Alone in the wilderness. She had no weapon, no strength left to fight. If she knocked on that door, she was putting her life in unknown hands. But if she didn't, Harold's men would find her, and that would be worse than death. Thunder rolled across the sky like God clearing his throat. Clara forced herself forward. Her hand, shaking violently from cold and fear, rose to knock against the rough wood. 3 sharp raps, then nothing but the sound of rain and her own ragged breathing. Footsteps inside. Heavy, deliberate. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the cabin's interior. Tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build. He wore dark trousers and a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that caught the lamplight like chips of gray stone. Those eyes swept over her, taking in her soaked dress, her wild hair, the desperate terror she knew must be written across her face. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her teeth were chattering too hard. The man's expression shifted. Not to suspicion or anger, but to something like concern. He took a single step toward her, then stopped abruptly when she flinched backward. His hands came up slowly, palms out. Easy, he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. You're all right. You're safe. Safe. The word was almost meaningless to her now. Clara's voice cracked. She tried again. Please, I can't. You need to get out of this storm, the man finished for her. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. Come inside. Clara didn't move. Her body had frozen, locked between flight and collapse. The man watched her for a moment, then seemed to understand. He took another step back, putting more distance between them, and gestured to the interior of the cabin. I'm going to move over there, he said, pointing to the far wall near the fireplace. You come in when you're ready. Door stays open if you want. He did exactly what he'd said, walked slowly across the small cabin and positioned himself near the hearth, a good 12 feet from the entrance. Then he stood there, waiting, his posture deliberately relaxed. Clara's survival instinct screamed at her to run, but her body was shutting down. She could feel it, the trembling in her legs, the darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. If she didn't get warm and dry soon, the storm would kill her anyway. She took one step forward, then another. Her boot crossed the threshold. The man didn't move. Clara stepped fully inside, and the warmth of the cabin hit her like a wall. It almost hurt, the contrast between the cold rain and this dry heat. Her legs wavered. Shut the door if you want, the man said quietly, or leave it open. Up to you. Clara reached back and pushed the door closed. The sound of the storm immediately muted, replaced by the crackle of the fire. The cabin was small but well kept. One room, maybe 16 by 20 feet. A narrow bed against one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and tools. Everything had its place. Everything was clean. You're soaked through, the man observed. There's a blanket on the bed there, and I've got coffee on the fire. Clara's gaze darted to the bed, then back to him. He was still standing by the fireplace, hadn't moved an inch closer. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Giving her name felt dangerous, but lying felt worse. She was too tired to maintain a fiction. Clara, she whispered. He nodded slowly. I'm Cole Mercer. He paused. I ride route for the territory, checking fence lines, tracking cattle movements, that sort of thing. I'm out here alone most of the time. Clara didn't know what to do with that information. Was he trying to reassure her, warn her? I'm not going to hurt you, Clara, Cole said, his gray eyes steady on hers. But you look like you're about to fall over. So here's what I'm thinking. You take that blanket and get yourself dry by the fire. I'll pour you some coffee. And then if you want to tell me why you're running through a thunderstorm in the middle of the night, I'll listen. How do you know I'm running? The question came out sharper than she intended. Cole's expression didn't change. Because nobody walks into a storm like this unless they're running from something worse. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, but what was the point? Everything about her, her appearance, her fear, her presence here, told the story. They're looking for me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My stepfather's men. They'll come this way. When? I don't know. Tonight. Tomorrow. They were saddling horses when I left. Cole absorbed this information with a slight nod. Then we've got time to figure this out. He moved, slowly, deliberately, to the fireplace and picked up a tin cup. He filled it from a battered coffee pot hanging over the coals. But first, you need to get warm. Cold like that will kill you just as sure as anything else. He set the cup on the table, then returned to his spot by the fire. Clara stared at the cup, at the blanket on the bed, at this stranger who was offering help without asking for anything in return, at least not yet. The shaking in her limbs was getting worse. Her vision swam. Cole's voice came again, softer this time. I'm going to turn around now, give you privacy to change. Just don't pass out before you get that blanket around you. He turned his back to her, facing the fire. Clara stood there for another heartbeat, testing the moment. Then her survival instinct overrode her fear. She moved quickly to the bed, grabbed the thick wool blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her dress was so heavy with water that removing it seemed impossible, so she simply huddled into the blanket's warmth, feeling it begin to seep into her frozen skin. She retrieved the coffee cup with trembling hands and took a sip. It was hot and bitter and perfect. You decent? Cole asked, still facing away. Yes. He turned back around. His gaze swept over her again, assessing, she realized, not leering, checking to see if she was in immediate danger of collapse. Sit, he said, nodding toward one of the chairs. Before you fall. Clara sank into the chair, clutching the coffee cup like a lifeline. Now that she'd stopped moving, the exhaustion was crushing. Her eyelids felt like lead weights. Cole pulled the second chair around and sat down, but he positioned it at an angle, not directly across from her, not blocking the door, giving her space. How long you been running? He asked. Few hours. Lost my horse. You come from Brennan's ranch? Clara's head snapped up. You know him? Know of him. Heard he had a stepdaughter. Cole's expression darkened slightly. Heard other things too, about how he does business. What things? Cole hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. That he's not particular about how he gets what he wants. That people who cross him tend to have bad luck. His gray eyes met hers. That his wife died sudden-like a few months back. Clara's hands tightened around the cup. She was my mother. Something shifted in Cole's face, a flicker of understanding, maybe sympathy. I'm sorry. The simple condolence nearly broke her. Clara bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, forcing back the tears that threatened. She couldn't afford to cry. Not yet. Not until she was truly safe, if such a thing even existed anymore. He killed her, Clara said flatly. I found letters. She knew. She wrote it down, but she didn't get them sent before. Her voice cracked. Before it was too late. Cole leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. You sure about that? I'm sure. Then why are you running? Why not go to the law in Kearney? Clara let out a bitter laugh. The sheriff is Harold's friend. They play cards every week. Who do you think he'd believe, a respected rancher or his hysterical stepdaughter? Cole's jaw tightened. So he's got leverage. He's got everything. The ranch, the money, the connections. Clara stared down into her coffee. And he's got a deal worked out with Marcus Dawson. I marry Dawson tomorrow, or I was supposed to. Dawson gets a young wife and access to Harold's business. Harold gets Dawson's silence about whatever he's been doing. What's Dawson like? Mean, Clara said simply. He had a wife before. She died too. Fell down the stairs, they said. She looked up at Cole. But I saw her once before it happened. She had bruises. Everywhere. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Rain continued to hammer against the roof. So you ran, Cole said finally. I ran, Clara confirmed. I didn't have a plan. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let him. She stopped, her breath hitching. I'd rather die out there in the storm than marry Marcus Dawson. Cole studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, moving back toward the fireplace. Clara tensed, but he simply picked up a poker and prodded at the logs, sending up a shower of sparks. You're not going to die in the storm, he said, his back to her. And you're not going back to Brennan's ranch. Not if you don't want to. Clara blinked. What? Cole turned to face her. I said you're not going back. Question is, where do you want to go? Clara hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. I don't have family. My mother's people are all back east, but I haven't seen them in years. I don't even know if they're still alive. What about Fort Kearney? The fort? There's a settlement there. More law than just a local sheriff. Army presence and... Cole paused. There's a woman there, Mrs. Eleanor Ward. She runs a boarding house, knew most of the families in the area. If anyone could help you sort this out proper, she could. Hope, fragile and tentative, stirred in Clara's chest. You think she'd help me? I think she'd listen. More than that, I can't say. Cole crossed his arms. But Fort Kearney's about 15 miles east of here, half a day's ride if we start at first light. Cole met her eyes steadily. You think I'm going to let you walk into town alone with Brennan's men hunting for you? Clara's throat constricted. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Don't need to know you to know what's right, Cole's voice was firm. A woman running from a forced marriage and a murdered mother. That's not complicated. That's just wrong. and I've got no patience for men who think they can own another person. The conviction in his words sent a strange warmth through Clara's chest, different from the heat of the fire or the coffee, something deeper. "I don't have money to pay you," she said quietly. "Didn't ask for any." "Then why?" Cole was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone rougher, like the words cost him something. "Because about 8 years back, I had a sister, Anna. She was in a situation kind of like yours. Bad man, no way out. I was working cattle drives back then, gone for months at a time. By the time I got back," he stopped, his jaw working. "I was too late. Found her in the creek behind the house where she'd been working. They said she slipped and drowned." Clara's breath caught. "But she didn't." "No, she didn't." Cole's eyes had gone distant, seeing something Clara couldn't. "She ran, and she died alone because nobody was there to help her." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding. "I can't bring Anna back," Cole said finally, "but I can make sure you don't end up in that creek. So yeah, Clara Hayes, I'm going to help you. No payment, no debt, just because it's the right thing to do." Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole nodded once, then turned back to the fire. "You should sleep. I'll keep watch. Make sure nobody comes calling." Clara glanced toward the bed, the only bed in the cabin. "Where will you—" "Floor's fine. I've slept on worse." "I can't take your bed." "You're not taking it. I'm offering it." Cole pulled a bedroll from the corner and spread it out near the fireplace. "Besides, I want to keep the fire going. Warmer here anyway." Clara watched him settle onto the floor, his movements economical and practiced. This was a man used to rough conditions, used to making do. He wasn't offering her his bed out of some elaborate courtesy. He genuinely didn't seem to care. Or rather, he cared more about her comfort than his own. "Cole?" Clara said softly. He glanced up at her. "That thing you said before, about earning my trust. You—" She swallowed hard. "You're doing it, just so you know." Something flickered across Cole's face. Surprise, maybe, or something close to it, but his voice stayed steady. "Good. That's good, Clara." He lay back, settling his head on his saddle. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Clara rose slowly and moved to the bed. She lay down on top of the covers, still wrapped in the blanket, and turned her face toward the wall. Behind her she could hear Cole's breathing evening out, the fire crackling, the rain drumming steadily on the roof. For the first time in months, maybe years, Clara felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. Her eyes drifted closed, and despite everything, sleep came to claim her. Outside, the storm raged on. Lightning continued to split the sky, illuminating the endless prairie in stark flashes of white. And somewhere out there in the darkness, 3 riders turned their horses toward the west, following tracks that the rain was steadily washing away. Harold Brennan stood on the porch of his ranch house, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and watched the storm with cold calculation. Clara would be found, she would be brought back, and she would marry Dawson as planned, because Harold Brennan always got what he wanted. Always. But 12 miles away, in a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and coffee, a woman slept without fear for the first time in months. And a man who'd lost his sister sat watch by the fire, his gray eyes alert, his rifle propped against the wall within easy reach. The storm would pass, morning would come, and with it, choices that would change everything. Clara's breathing had gone deep and even, the rhythm of exhaustion finally claiming its due. Cole listened to it for a while, making sure she was truly asleep, before he allowed himself to relax even slightly. He stared into the flames, thinking about Anna, about the way she used to laugh, about the letter he'd received 3 weeks too late, the one that explained everything and nothing at all. He thought about the men he'd met like Brennan, men who saw people as property, as tools to be used and discarded, men who hid behind money and influence and the thin veneer of respectability. Cole had spent 8 years wishing he could go back, wishing he could have been there when Anna needed him. He couldn't change the past, but he could damn sure do something about the present. He added another log to the fire and settled back against his saddle, his hand resting loosely on his rifle. Outside, the thunder was already beginning to fade, moving east across the plains. The worst of the storm was passing, but the real storm, the one brewing between Clara Hayes and the men who wanted to own her, that storm was just beginning, and Cole Mercer intended to be standing in its path when it broke. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough timber, unfamiliar. Sunlight slanted through a single window, painting golden squares across worn floorboards. Then memory crashed back, the storm, the flight, the cabin. Cole Mercer. She sat up quickly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. Her dress had dried stiff and uncomfortable against her skin, and her hair hung in tangled waves down her back. Across the room, Cole stood at the small stove, his back to her, tending a skillet. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Figured you could use some food." Clara's stomach answered for her, growling loudly enough that Cole glanced back with something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. "There's a basin of water by the door," he continued, "fresh from the pump, and I set out some things that might help. Comb, bit of soap. Nothing fancy, but it's clean." Clara looked where he indicated and saw a chipped ceramic basin on a small stand, steam rising gently from its surface. Beside it lay the items he'd mentioned, arranged with careful consideration. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cole nodded and turned back to his cooking. "Take your time. Food'll keep." Clara rose, her muscles protesting. Everything ached, her legs from running, her shoulders from tension, her very bones from the cold she'd endured. She moved to the basin and splashed the warm water on her face, gasping slightly at how good it felt. The soap smelled like lye and something herbal, sage maybe. She worked it through her hands and up her arms, scrubbing away the mud and fear of the previous night. The comb caught in her hair, but she worked through the tangles with patient determination. When she finally looked up, catching her reflection in a small mirror hung above the basin, she barely recognized herself. Her face was pale, shadows dark beneath her eyes, but there was something else there too, something harder than what had existed before. The girl who'd lived at Brennan's ranch was gone. The woman looking back at her now had crossed a threshold there was no returning from. "It's ready," Cole said. Clara turned to find him setting 2 tin plates on the table, each loaded with bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread. Her mouth watered. They sat across from each other, and for several minutes the only sound was eating. Clara couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good, or maybe she'd just been too afraid to taste anything properly for months. Cole ate with economical efficiency, his attention occasionally drifting to the window, watching, always watching. "See anything?" Clara asked. "Nothing yet, but they'll come." He took a sip of coffee. "Question is when and how many?" Clara's appetite dimmed slightly. 3 men, probably. Maybe 4 if Harold sent extra. "They good trackers?" "2 of them are. Dutch and Reese, they've been with Harold for years. They can track a rabbit through rock if they have to." Cole absorbed this information with a slight nod. "Then they'll have followed your trail to where you lost your horse. Storm would have washed out most of the tracks after that, but if they're as good as you say, they'll work out the general direction. This cabin's the only shelter for miles in this area. They'll check it." Fear coiled in Clara's stomach. "Maybe I should leave. Go now, before they arrive. I don't want you caught in the middle of this." "Too late for that. I'm already in the middle." Cole's gray eyes met hers steadily. "Besides, you leave now on foot. They'll spot you before you make it a mile. At least here we've got walls and a chance to talk our way through it." "Talk?" Clara heard the skepticism in her own voice. "These men don't talk. They follow orders. Everyone talks if you find the right words." Cole pushed back from the table and stood, moving to the window. "But just in case talking doesn't work, we should have a plan." He spent the next several minutes explaining what he had in mind, a strategy that relied more on psychology than force, though Clara noticed he kept his rifle close and his revolver holstered at his hip. He spoke calmly, methodically, like he'd thought through multiple scenarios during his night watch. "If they show up, you stay behind me," Cole said firmly. "Let me do the talking first. These men know you're afraid. That's been their weapon against you. Don't give them that weapon today. I am afraid, Clara admitted. Being afraid and showing fear are different things. Cole turned from the window to face her. One's natural, the other's a choice. You choose how much of yourself you let them see. The words settled into Clara's chest like seeds finding soil. She thought about the past months at the ranch, how she'd learned to make herself small, quiet, invisible. How she'd let Harold see her fear because some part of her had believed that if she showed enough submission, he might show mercy. She'd been wrong. How do you know all this? She asked. About fear and choices? Cole's expression shifted, something distant moving behind his eyes. Spent time in places where showing weakness got you killed. Learned fast that the only thing you really control is yourself, not the situation, not other people. Just you. Where? Doesn't matter now. He moved away from the window, the conversation clearly closed. Point is, you're stronger than you think, Clara. You proved that last night when you ran instead of staying. That took courage. Claire wanted to argue that it hadn't been courage, just desperation. But before she could speak, Cole's posture changed. He'd gone still, his head cocked slightly to the side. What is it? Clara whispered. Horses. 3 of them, coming from the west. Terror flooded through her. They found me. They found the cabin. Cole's voice stayed calm. That's not the same thing. Now remember what we talked about. Stay behind me. Let me handle this. He moved to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the small porch with Clara following a few paces behind. The morning sun was bright after the storm, making everything seem too vivid, too sharp. In the distance, 3 riders approached at a steady pace, not rushing but not casual either. Men who knew their business. As they drew closer, Clara recognized them. Dutch Reynolds rode in the center, a thick-set man with a gray-streaked beard and eyes like flint. To his left was Reese Carter, younger and leaner, with a reputation for meanness. The third man she didn't know well, but she'd seen him at the ranch. They called him Pike. Dutch reined in about 20 feet from the cabin, his gaze sweeping from Cole to Clara and back again. His hand rested casually on his thigh, inches from his holstered revolver. Morning, Dutch said, his voice gravelly. We're looking for someone. That so? Cole's tone was mild, almost bored. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his posture relaxed despite the rifle leaning against the doorframe within easy reach. Lot of empty prairie out here to be looking. Ain't empty if you know what you're looking for. Dutch's eyes fixed on Clara. Miss Hayes, your daddy's real worried about you. Stepfather, Clara corrected, her voice stronger than she felt. And I left because I chose to. Reese spat into the dirt. Girl don't get to choose. She's promised to Mr. Dawson. Funny thing about promises, Cole interjected smoothly. They only count if both parties agree. Seems to me Miss Hayes here doesn't agree. Dutch's gaze sharpened on Cole. This your business, mister? Miss Hayes knocked on my door last night in the middle of a storm. I gave her shelter. That makes it my business. You know who her stepfather is? Harold Brennan. Yeah, I know. Cole's expression didn't change. Also know Miss Hayes is of legal age and can go where she pleases. Not if her family says different. Pike spoke up for the first time, his voice thin and nasty. Girl's family property until she's married off proper. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That how you see women? As property? That's how the law sees them, Dutch said. He shifted in his saddle and Clara saw his hand drift closer to his gun. Now, we can do this easy or hard. Girl comes back with us, nobody needs to get hurt. Third option, Cole said quietly. You ride back to Brennan and tell him Miss Hayes is heading to Fort Kearney. She'll speak with the authorities there about her situation. Let the law sort it out proper. Reese laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think some fort commander's going to side with a hysterical girl over Mr. Brennan? Man's got friends everywhere. Then he's got nothing to worry about, does he? Cole's tone stayed level, but Clara could sense the steel beneath it. If everything's legal and proper like you say, the law will send her right back. But if there's something wrong with the arrangement, if maybe Mr. Brennan doesn't have the right to force this marriage, then she deserves her say. Dutch studied Cole for a long moment. You're making a mistake, friend. Wouldn't be my first. Cole's hand drifted, casually, slowly, toward the rifle. But I'm making it anyway. Miss Hayes rides with me to Fort Kearney. You three can follow if you want, make your case there. But she's not going back to that ranch against her will." The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could see Reese's hand on his gun now, see Pike shifting his weight, 3 against 1. Even if Cole was fast, and something told her he was, the odds were terrible. But then Dutch raised his hand slightly, a gesture that stopped his companions cold. "You ex-military?" Dutch asked Cole. "Was." "Cavalry?" "Infantry. Sergeant." Dutch grunted, something like respect flickering across his hard features. "Thought I recognized the stance. You served in the Indian campaigns?" "Some." "Then you know what happens when soldiers don't follow orders." "I also know what happens when men follow orders that are wrong." Cole's gray eyes locked on Dutch's. "And I know the difference between a lawful command and a man trying to force something that shouldn't be forced." Another silence fell. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp in the clear morning air. Finally, Dutch gathered his reins. "We'll report back to Mr. Brennan. Tell him the situation." "You do that," Cole said. But Reese wasn't satisfied. "Dutch? We can take him. 3 of us." "Shut it, Reese." Dutch's voice cracked like a whip. "Man's got military training and the high ground. You want to die over this? You go right ahead. I'm riding back." He turned his horse, and after a moment's hesitation, Pike followed. Reese glared at both of them, at Cole, at Clara, his face twisted with frustration. But eventually, he too wheeled his mount around. "This ain't over," Reese called back. "Mr. Brennan's gonna—" "I said, shut it," Dutch interrupted. He looked back at Cole one last time. "You're buying her maybe half a day, soldier, maybe less. Brennan's got reach you can't imagine." "Then I guess we better ride fast," Cole replied. The 3 men spurred their horses into a canter, heading back the way they'd come. Clara and Cole watched until they disappeared over a rise, dust hanging in the air behind them. Only then did Clara realize she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale. That was— She couldn't find words for what it had been. "Close," Cole finished. He picked up his rifle and turned back into the cabin. "Too close. We need to move now. They'll be back with reinforcements, or Brennan himself. Either way, we want to be long gone." Clara followed him inside, her mind reeling. "You could have been killed. All 3 of them had guns." "So did I." Cole was already gathering supplies, food, water, ammunition. His movements were quick and efficient. "And Dutch is smart enough to know that even if they took me down, at least one of them wouldn't walk away from it. Maybe 2. Men like that don't risk dying for someone else's daughter unless the pay's extraordinary." "You think they'll tell Harold I'm heading to Fort Kearney?" "I know they will. Which means Harold will either come himself or send more men. Either way, we've got maybe 4 hours head start if we're lucky." He paused, looking at her directly. "You still want to do this? Once we start riding, there's no going back to that cabin. We're committed." Clara thought about the alternative, going back with Dutch and his men, marrying Marcus Dawson, living under Harold's control for however long she survived it. She thought about her mother's letters, about the truth that needed to be told. "I want to do this," she said firmly. Cole nodded. "Then we ride." Within 15 minutes they were ready. Cole had saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and gathered enough supplies for the journey. He helped Clara mount up behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. "Hold tight," he said. "We've got ground to cover." They rode east into the brightening day, the cabin disappearing behind them. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, grass still wet from the storm, bending and swaying in the morning breeze. Clara had never been this far east before. Her whole world had been bounded by the ranch and Kearney. Everything beyond that was unknown territory, but so was the woman she was becoming. They rode in silence for the first hour, Cole keeping the horse at a steady pace that ate up miles without exhausting the animal. Clara found herself noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The way Cole sat his saddle with easy confidence, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the way he seemed completely at home in this vast emptiness. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said finally. "Go ahead." "Why did Dutch back down, really?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Because he's a professional. Professionals calculate risk. He looked at the situation and decided the odds weren't good enough. But Reese wanted to fight. Reese is young and stupid. He thinks being tough means never backing down. Men like that usually end up dead before they're 30. Cole adjusted his grip on the reins. Dutch has survived this long because he knows when to push and when to walk away. He'll report to Brennan, collect his pay, and sleep fine tonight. What about you? Clara asked. How do you sleep? Depends on the day. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, warming Clara's back through her dress. She found herself relaxing incrementally, her grip on Cole's waist loosening from desperate to merely secure. The rhythm of the horse's gait was almost soothing. Around midday, Cole reined in near a small creek, barely more than a trickle, but enough for the horse to drink. He dismounted first, then helped Clara down. Her legs were stiff from riding, and she stumbled slightly. Cole's hand steadied her elbow. You all right? Just not used to riding double. We'll rest here for a bit. Let the horse recover. He led the gelding to the water, then pulled out some of the food he'd packed. More bread, some dried meat, a canteen of water. They sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, eating without speaking. Clara found herself studying Cole when she thought he wasn't looking. The hard lines of his face, the scars on his hands, the way he moved with deliberate economy. This was a man who'd seen things, done things. A man who'd learned to survive in a world that offered no guarantees. What was your sister like? Clara asked suddenly. Cole's hand stilled on the canteen. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was gentle. Too gentle for the world she was born into. Always saw the best in people, even when they showed her their worst. His voice went rough. She used to sing. Had a voice like, I don't even know. Like something that shouldn't exist in a place this hard. She sounds wonderful. She was. Cole took a drink of water. She deserved better than what she got. So do a lot of people, Clara said quietly. So do you, for helping me. Cole glanced at her, something unreadable in his gray eyes. Not looking for thanks, Clara. I know, but you have it anyway. They mounted up again after 20 minutes, continuing east. The landscape began to change subtly. The grass grew a bit shorter, the terrain rolled more dramatically. In the distance, Clara could see the dark line of trees that marked the Platte River Valley. Fort Kearny's on the Platte, Cole explained. Another few hours and we'll be there. And then what? Then we find Mrs. Ward, get you somewhere safe while we figure out the next steps. You keep saying we, Clara observed. You got a problem with that? No, I'm not used to anyone being on my side. Cole turned his head slightly, though he couldn't see her from his position. Get used to it. The simple statement, delivered in his matter-of-fact tone, made Clara's throat tighten with emotion she couldn't quite name. She pressed her forehead against his back, allowing herself a moment of weakness that only she would know about. They rode on through the afternoon, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Cole maintained their pace, steady and relentless, always watching the trail behind them for signs of pursuit. None came. But as they crested a rise and saw Fort Kearny in the distance, its buildings solid and reassuring against the prairie, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't end in her being dragged back to Harold Brennan's ranch. There it is, Cole said. Fort Kearny. Clara looked at the fort, then at the man who'd brought her here. A stranger who'd become something else in the span of a single night and day. A stranger who'd stepped back when she was afraid, who'd stood between her and violence, who'd ridden beside her toward an uncertain future without asking for anything in return. Cole? She said softly. Yeah? Thank you. For all of it. His shoulders shifted slightly, the closest thing to a shrug she'd seen from him. Day's not over yet, but they both knew something had already changed. Whatever happened next at Fort Kearny, Clara Hayes was no longer alone in this fight, and Cole Mercer had found something he'd been missing since Anna died, a purpose that extended beyond his own survival. They rode down the slope toward the fort as the afternoon light turned golden, two people whose lives had intersected in a storm and were now bound together by something stronger than circumstance. They were bound by choice. and that made all the difference. Fort Kearny rose from the prairie like a promise kept in timber and stone. The settlement that had grown up around it was larger than Clara had imagined. Dozens of buildings lining dusty streets, the American flag snapping in the wind above the fort's parade ground. People moved about their business, soldiers and civilians alike, creating a sense of order and civilization that felt almost foreign after the isolation of the past day. Cole guided the horse down the main street, his eyes taking in everything with the same careful attention he'd shown on the trail. Clara felt exposed here, visible in ways she hadn't been in the open prairie. Every face they passed could belong to someone loyal to Harold. Every window could hide watching eyes. "Mrs. Ward's boarding house is on 2nd Street, Cole said over his shoulder. "White building with green shutters. Can't miss it." They found it easily enough. A 2-story structure that looked well-maintained with flower boxes beneath the windows and a painted sign reading Ward's Boarding House, respectable accommodation. Cole dismounted and helped Clara down, his hand steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. The front door opened before they could knock, and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple gray dress with an embroidered collar, and there was something immediately capable about her presence. "Cole Mercer," the woman said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "It's been months since you've darkened my doorway, and you've brought a guest." "Mrs. Ward." Cole removed his hat. "This is Miss Clara Hayes. She needs help." Eleanor Ward's gaze shifted to Clara, and in that moment Clara felt thoroughly assessed, not judged exactly, but measured with the kind of keen perception that came from decades of reading people. Whatever Mrs. Ward saw seemed to satisfy her, because she stepped aside and gestured them in. "Come inside, both of you. You look like you've ridden hard, and I suspect there's a story that needs telling." She glanced up and down the street before closing the door behind them. "And perhaps a story that needs some privacy." The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, with simple furniture and curtains that let in the afternoon light. Mrs. Ward led them to a small parlor off the main hall and indicated they should sit. "I'll make tea," she announced. "Don't start without me." She disappeared into what Clara assumed was the kitchen, leaving them alone. Clara sank into an upholstered chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation with Dutch and the long ride was draining away, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness. Cole remained standing near the window, his posture alert despite the hours in the saddle. He was still watching, still calculating. Clara wondered if he ever truly relaxed. Mrs. Ward returned with a tea service that looked too delicate for the rough frontier town, but she handled it with practiced ease. She poured 3 cups and settled into her own chair before fixing Clara with those penetrating blue eyes. "Now then," she said, "tell me what brings you here, child." Clara glanced at Cole, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. She took a breath and began to speak, starting with her mother's death and ending with their arrival moments ago. Mrs. Ward listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively graver. When Clara finished, Mrs. Ward set down her teacup with careful precision. "Your mother was Margaret, wasn't she? Margaret Brennan, formerly Margaret Hayes." Clara's breath caught. "You knew her?" "Not well, but yes. She used to come to town occasionally in the early days of her marriage to Harold. She stopped coming about a year before she died." Mrs. Ward's mouth thinned. "I noticed. Others did too, but Harold Brennan is a powerful man in these parts, and people are often reluctant to see what they don't want to see." "She wrote letters," Clara said, "before she died. Letters saying he was poisoning her." "Do you still have these letters?" Clara's hand went to the small bag she'd carried from the ranch, the one item she'd managed to keep through everything. "Yes, all of them." "May I see them?" Clara pulled out the bundle of papers, tied together with a piece of ribbon. Her mother's handwriting covered the pages, shaky in places, desperate in others. Mrs. Ward took them carefully, as though handling something sacred, and began to read. The silence stretched. Cole remained by the window, a silent sentinel. Clara watched Mrs. Ward's face, seeing her expression shift from concern to anger to what looked like grief. Finally, the older woman looked up. "This is damning evidence, Clara. If what your mother wrote is true—" "It is true," Clara interrupted. "I watched her get sicker. I watched Harold bring her medicine that only made things worse. I didn't understand what I was seeing until it was too late. Mrs. Ward nodded slowly. Then Harold Brennan murdered his wife, and now he's trying to cover his tracks by marrying you off to Marcus Dawson, who would have a vested interest in keeping these letters hidden. That's how I see it, Cole said quietly from his position by the window. Mrs. Ward looked at him. And you're willing to stand with her? Brennan has reach, Cole. He has friends in the territorial government, connections with the railroad companies. He could make life very difficult for anyone who crosses him. He can try. Something like approval flickered in Mrs. Ward's eyes. She turned back to Clara. What do you want, child? What outcome are you seeking? I want the truth known, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. I want my mother's death investigated properly, and I want to be free of Harold Brennan and Marcus Dawson forever. That's a tall order. I know. Mrs. Ward was silent for a moment, thinking. Then she rose from her chair with decision in her movements. The fort commander is Colonel Matthews. He's a good man, fair-minded, but more importantly, the territorial marshal passes through here twice a month. He's due tomorrow. She looked between Clara and Cole. If we can get these letters to the marshal and convince him to investigate, you might have a chance. What about tonight? Cole asked. Brennan knows we're heading here. He'll come. Then we make sure Clara is somewhere he can't reach her easily. Mrs. Ward moved to the door. I have a room upstairs at the back of the house. It has a lock and overlooks the alley. You'll stay there, Clara. Cole, you're welcome to the room next to hers. I'll sleep in the hall, Cole said, between her door and the stairs. Mrs. Ward studied him for a moment, then nodded. As you wish. Come, let me show you up. They climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. Mrs. Ward's boarding house was quiet. Most of her tenants were out at this hour. She led them to the back of the building and opened a door to reveal a modest room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window with lace curtains. It's not much, Mrs. Ward said, but it's safe. I'll bring up some supper later. For now, both of you should rest. You look like you need it. After she left, Clara stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain. The walls felt too close after the vast openness of the prairie. The safety felt fragile, temporary. Try to sleep, Cole said from the doorway. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Cole? Clara turned to face him. What if they come tonight? What if... Then I'll be between you and them, same as I've been since last night. His gray eyes held hers steadily. You're not alone in this, Clara. I need you to trust that. I do, she whispered. I'm just not used to trusting anyone. I know. Something softened in his expression. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we talk to the law. He closed the door quietly, and Clara heard him settle in the hallway outside. She moved to the bed and lay down without removing her dress, staring up at the ceiling. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Every sound made her tense. Every creak of the building sent her heart racing. But Cole was outside her door, and somehow that made all the difference. She must have slept because when she woke, the light coming through the window had turned to dusk. Voices drifted up from downstairs, Mrs. Ward speaking with someone, though Clara couldn't make out the words. She rose and moved to the window, looking down into the alley below. That's when she saw them. 4 riders were moving down the alley, their progress slow and deliberate. Even in the fading light, Clara recognized the lead horse. Harold Brennan sat tall in the saddle, his face set in hard lines. Behind him rode Dutch, Reese, and another man Clara didn't recognize. Someone new, someone dangerous-looking with crossed gun belts and dead eyes. They'd found her. Already. Clara's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. The window was too high to jump, and they were watching the building. She moved to the door and opened it carefully. Cole sat with his back against the wall, his rifle across his knees. He looked up at her, instantly alert. They're here, Clara whispered. In the alley, 4 of them. Cole rose smoothly, moving to her window and looking out. His jaw tightened. Brennan himself. He's not wasting time. What do we do? We don't panic. Cole's voice was calm, almost conversational. They're watching to see if we're here, but they can't just break in. This is a respectable establishment in the middle of town. They'll try something else first. Like what? like using the law against us. As if summoning it by speaking, there was a heavy knock on the front door downstairs. Clara heard Mrs. Ward answer, heard male voices, one she didn't recognize, speaking with authority. "Miss Hayes," the voice called up the stairs. "This is Sheriff Carson. I need to speak with you, ma'am." Cole's expression darkened. Brennan's got the local law in his pocket. Should have expected that. "What do I do?" Fear clawed at Clara's throat. "You go down there, but I'm going with you, and you let me do the talking first." He checked his revolver, then met her eyes. "Remember what I said about showing fear. You're not a runaway girl. You're a woman with rights, demanding justice. Hold on to that." They descended the stairs together to find Mrs. Ward standing in the entrance hall with a portly man wearing a sheriff's badge. He had a weak chin and watery eyes, and he looked uncomfortable with the situation. Behind him, visible through the open door, stood Harold Brennan. Clara's stepfather looked exactly as she remembered, tall and lean, with iron gray hair and cold blue eyes that had never shown her anything but calculation. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Clara," Harold said, his voice smooth as oil. "Thank goodness you're safe. We've been worried sick." "Have you?" Clara said flatly. Sheriff Carson cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, your father has made a formal complaint. He says you ran away from home, stole money and property." "Stepfather," Clara interrupted, "and I didn't steal anything except my own freedom." "Now, Clara." Harold stepped forward, and Cole immediately moved to intercept, positioning himself between them. Harold's eyes flicked to Cole, assessing. "Who's this?" "Cole Mercer," Cole said evenly. "I'm here making sure Miss Hayes gets fair treatment under the law." "Mr. Brennan says the young lady is promised in marriage," Sheriff Carson continued, consulting a piece of paper. "That makes her situation a family matter, not a legal one." "It's a legal matter if the marriage is being forced against her will," Cole countered. "Miss Hayes is of legal age. She has the right to refuse." "She's my responsibility until she's married," Harold said, his tone hardening. "Sheriff, I'm asking you to return my stepdaughter to my custody. She's clearly been influenced by outside parties with their own agendas." "My agenda is to stay alive," Clara said, finding her voice. "Something that would be difficult if I married Marcus Dawson." Harold's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Marcus is a respected businessman. He would take good care of you." "The way you took care of my mother?" The words hung in the air like a thrown knife. Sheriff Carson looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Ward, standing in the doorway to the parlor, had gone very still. "Your mother died of natural causes," Harold said carefully. "The doctor confirmed it." "Did he?" Clara took a step forward, and Cole's hand touched her elbow gently, not restraining, just reminding her he was there. "Or did you pay him to confirm it?" "That's a serious accusation, young lady," Sheriff Carson warned. "I have proof," Clara said. "Letters my mother wrote before she died. Letters describing what you did to her." Harold's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something cold and dangerous beneath. Letters written by a sick woman with a confused mind. They proved nothing. "Then you won't mind if the territorial marshal reviews them," Mrs. Ward interjected quietly. "He'll be here tomorrow. I'm sure he'd be very interested in investigating Mrs. Brennan's death properly." Harold's gaze shifted to Mrs. Ward, and Clara saw him recognize the threat. A local sheriff he could control. A territorial marshal was another matter entirely. "Sheriff Carson," Harold said, his voice taking on an edge, "I'm asking you formally to return my stepdaughter to my care. She's clearly not in her right mind, making wild accusations." "I'm in perfect health and perfect sanity," Clara interrupted, "and I'm not going anywhere with you." The law says I'm a citizen with rights," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I have the right to refuse a marriage I don't want. I have the right to bring evidence of a crime to the authorities. And I have the right to be protected from a man who murdered my mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Sheriff Carson seemed at a loss for words. Harold's expression went flat, all pretense of concern dropping away. "You've made a mistake, Clara, a very serious mistake." "The only mistake was not speaking up sooner," Clara replied. Harold turned to the sheriff. Are you going to do your job, Carson? Or do I need to speak with your superiors about your competence? Sheriff Carson's face reddened. He looked between Harold and Clara, clearly torn between his loyalty to a powerful man and the growing awareness that something wasn't right about this situation. I think, Mrs. Ward said carefully, that Miss Hayes should remain here until the marshal arrives tomorrow. He can sort out the legal questions. Surely one more night won't matter, Mr. Brennan. One night could matter a great deal, Harold said coldly, especially if outside influences continue to fill my stepdaughter's head with dangerous ideas. The only dangerous ideas are the ones that say a man can murder his wife and force his stepdaughter into marriage to cover it up, Cole said quietly. Harold's hand moved toward his coat, and instantly Cole's hand was on his revolver. Dutch and the other men outside shifted, hands dropping to their own weapons. The tension ratcheted up like a spring being wound too tight. Gentlemen, Mrs. Ward said sharply, this is a respectable establishment, and there will be no violence under my roof or on my property. Sheriff, I think you need to make a decision about how to handle this situation legally. Carson looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool evening air. Miss Hayes stays here tonight, he said finally. Mr. Brennan, you and your men return to your hotel. In the morning, we'll sort this out with the fort commander and wait for the marshal if necessary. This is unacceptable, Harold began. It's my decision, Carson said, finding a spine Clara hadn't known he possessed. And it's final. Now everyone step back and let tempers cool. For a moment, Clara thought Harold would refuse. His eyes had gone cold as winter ice, and his hand was still near his coat. But then he smiled, a thin, terrible smile that made Clara's blood run cold. As you wish, Sheriff. We'll wait until morning. He looked directly at Clara. But understand this, stepdaughter. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. You'll come back to the ranch, or you'll face the consequences of these accusations you're making. Let me worry about the consequences, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Harold's smile widened slightly. Oh, I'm not worried about your consequences, Clara. I'm worried about the consequences for anyone foolish enough to help you. His gaze shifted to Cole, then to Mrs. Ward, the threat implicit and unmistakable. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Brennan, Cole said softly. It's a statement of fact. Actions have consequences. People should remember that. Harold nodded to Sheriff Carson. Good evening, Sheriff. Mrs. Ward. We'll see you all in the morning. He turned and walked out, his men following. Clara watched through the window as they mounted their horses and rode away, but not far. They stopped at the hotel across the street, clearly visible, clearly watching. Sheriff Carson let out a breath. Miss Hayes, I hope you know what you're doing. Harold Brennan is not a man to cross lightly. Neither is a woman defending her mother's memory, Mrs. Ward said firmly. Thank you for your fairness, Sheriff. We'll see you in the morning. After Carson left, Mrs. Ward closed and locked the door. She turned to face Clara and Cole, her expression grave. He'll try something, she said. Harold didn't get where he is by accepting defeat. He'll make a move tonight. I know, Cole said, which is why I'm not sleeping. You can't stay awake all night, Clara protested. Watch me. He moved back toward the stairs. Mrs. Ward, are there other exits to this building? Back door through the kitchen, cellar entrance from outside, but it's locked from the inside. Good. Keep them locked. Clara, go back to your room. Stay away from the windows. If anything happens, anything at all, you barricade that door and don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Ward. Clara wanted to argue, but the look in Cole's eyes stopped her. This was the soldier now, not just the quiet route rider. This was a man who'd seen combat and knew how to prepare for it. She went upstairs and returned to her room, but she couldn't rest. She sat on the bed, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak. The night deepened, and across the street she could see lights in the hotel windows. Harold and his men were there, waiting, planning. Midnight came and went. Clara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at imagined sounds. Outside her door she could hear Cole moving occasionally, checking the stairs, the windows. Then, around 3 a.m, the first real sound came. A crash from downstairs, glass breaking. Clara was on her feet instantly, her heart hammering. She heard Cole's footsteps pounding down the stairs, heard Mrs. Ward's voice calling out an alarm, then gunshots. The sounds were deafening in the quiet night. 3 shots in rapid succession, followed by shouting. Clara ran to her door and yanked it open, terror overriding caution. She had to know what was happening, had to know if Cole was... "Stay back!" Cole's voice roared up from below. Clara froze at the top of the stairs. She could see into the entrance hall, could see Cole pressed against the wall near the shattered front window, his revolver drawn. Outside in the street, she glimpsed movement, men with guns. "They're trying to flush us out," Cole called up to her. "Get back in your room and lock the door." But Clara couldn't move. She watched as another window shattered, this one in the parlor. Glass rained across the floor. Mrs. Ward appeared from the kitchen, carrying an ancient shotgun with determined competence. "I've sent my tenant out the back to fetch the soldiers from the fort," Mrs. Ward announced. "They'll be here in minutes." "Minutes we might not have," Cole replied. He fired once through the broken window, a warning shot. "Brennan, this is your last chance to back off." Harold's voice came from the darkness outside. "Send Clara out, and no one else needs to get hurt." "Not happening." Another shot rang out, this one thudding into the doorframe inches from Cole's head. He returned fire immediately, and Clara heard a yelp of pain from outside. "Cole!" Clara called down. "Let me go. I don't want anyone dying for me." "Too late for that." Cole reloaded with practiced speed. "You go out there and you're dead anyway. We hold until help arrives." More gunfire erupted, a sustained barrage that sent Cole diving for cover. Mrs. Ward fired her shotgun out the side window, the blast enormous in the confined space. Clara heard someone scream outside. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Into the ringing silence came a new sound, bugles. The cavalry call, sharp and clear in the night air. "Soldiers coming?" someone shouted outside. "Mount up." Clara heard the thunder of hoofbeats retreating down the street. She raced to the window in time to see Harold and his men fleeing into the darkness, pursued by a squad of cavalry soldiers on horseback. Within minutes, the street was full of activity. Soldiers secured the boarding house, a captain took statements, and Clara found herself sitting in Mrs. Ward's parlor with a blanket around her shoulders while Cole spoke with the fort commander. Colonel Matthews was a stern-faced man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much of war. He listened to Cole's account, examined the bullet holes in the walls, and studied Clara with a mix of sympathy and calculation. "Miss Hayes," he said finally, "you're under the protection of the United States Army until the territorial marshal arrives. I've sent men after Brennan and his group. They won't get far." "Thank you," Clara whispered. But the colonel's next word sent ice through her veins. "However, you should know, Brennan and his men split up. We caught 2 of them, but Brennan himself got away." Cole's expression darkened. "He'll come back." "We'll be ready," Matthews assured him. "I'm stationing guards here and at the marshal's office. When Brennan surfaces, we'll take him into custody." Dawn was breaking as the soldiers finally withdrew, leaving 2 guards posted outside. Clara sat with Cole and Mrs. Ward in the parlor, exhausted beyond words but too wired to sleep. "He'll make one more try," Cole said quietly. "Brennan's desperate now, attacking a building in the middle of town, shooting at a civilian property. He's committed crimes he can't back away from. He'll either run for good or make one final attempt to silence Clara." "Then we'll be ready," Mrs. Ward said firmly. But as Clara looked at Cole's face, at the blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm from where flying glass had caught him, she felt the weight of what her freedom was costing. People were being hurt because of her. Good people were putting themselves in danger. "Cole," she said softly, "your arm." "It's nothing. Seen worse." "You've done enough, both of you. If I just..." "Don't finish that sentence," Cole interrupted. "We're past the point of backing down, Clara. Way past it. Now we see this through to the end, whatever that end looks like." Clara looked into his gray eyes and saw the determination there, the absolute refusal to yield. This man who'd stepped back when she was afraid had now stepped forward into danger without hesitation. And somewhere out there in the breaking dawn, Harold Brennan was planning his next move. The storm was coming, one last time. And when it broke, Clara knew everything would be decided, her future, her freedom, perhaps her very life. She just hoped they would all survive to see the other side. The sun rose over Fort Kearney like a judge taking the bench, harsh and unforgiving. Clara stood at the window of her room, watching soldiers move through the street below, their presence both reassuring and terrifying. Somewhere out there, Harold was planning, waiting. She could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. A soft knock came at her door. "Clara? It's Mrs. Ward. May I come in?" Clara opened the door to find the older woman carrying a tray with breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the violence of the night. "You need to eat," Mrs. Ward said firmly, setting the tray on the small table. "Whatever happens today, you'll need your strength." Clara sat obediently and picked at the food, though her stomach was twisted too tight to feel hungry. Mrs. Ward settled into the chair across from her, her sharp eyes assessing. "Cole's downstairs with Colonel Matthews," Mrs. Ward said. "They're preparing for the marshal's arrival. He sent word he'll be here by noon. And Harold? No sign of him yet. The soldiers found his camp about 5 miles out, abandoned. He's gone to ground somewhere, but he can't hide forever. Not now." Mrs. Ward reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with her own. "You're doing the right thing, child. I want you to remember that, no matter what happens today." "People are getting hurt because of me," Clara whispered. "Cole's injured. Your boarding house has bullet holes in the walls. What if someone had been killed?" "That blood would be on Harold Brennan's hands, not yours." Mrs. Ward's voice was steel. "Evil men count on good people being too afraid or too guilty to stand against them. They count on women like you staying silent because speaking up causes disruption. But you know what causes more harm? Silence. Always silence." Clara looked up at the older woman, seeing something fierce and unbreakable in her expression. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "I am." Mrs. Ward's gaze went distant for a moment. "I had a daughter once. She married a man who seemed respectable, seemed kind. By the time we understood what he really was, it was too late. She died trying to leave him, fell down a flight of stairs, they said, just like Marcus Dawson's wife." The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. "Mrs. Ward, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, be brave. Be what my daughter couldn't be because the world wouldn't let her." Mrs. Ward squeezed Clara's hand. "Finish your breakfast, then we go face the law together." An hour later, Clara descended the stairs to find the boarding house transformed into something like a fortress. Soldiers stood guard at every entrance, and Colonel Matthews had established what amounted to a command post in Mrs. Ward's parlor. Cole stood near the window, his injured arm properly bandaged now, his rifle within easy reach. He turned as Clara entered, and something in his expression softened. "You sleep at all?" "Not much. You?" "Same." He gestured to a chair. "Might as well sit. Marshall won't be here for another hour or so." Clara sat, acutely aware of the other people in the room. Soldiers, Mrs. Ward, the colonel. All of them were here because of her story, because of her accusations. The weight of their attention felt crushing. "Miss Hayes," Colonel Matthews said, his tone formal but not unkind, "I've reviewed the letters you provided to Mrs. Ward. They're disturbing. If even half of what your mother wrote is accurate, we're looking at murder." "It's all accurate," Clara said quietly. "I watched it happen. I just didn't understand what I was seeing until it was too late." "Did your stepfather know you'd found the letters?" "No, I found them after my mother died, hidden in her sewing basket. She'd written them over the course of several months, documenting everything. I think she meant to send them to someone but never got the chance." Matthews nodded slowly. "And the marriage arrangement with Marcus Dawson, you're certain it was made without your consent?" "I didn't even know about it until 2 days ago. Harold told me I'd be marrying Marcus the next day, as if it were already decided. When I refused, he—" Clara's voice wavered. "He made it clear refusal wasn't an option." "Did he threaten you?" "Not in words, but I knew. I'd seen what happened to my mother when she tried to resist him. I knew if I stayed, I'd end up the same way." The colonel exchanged a glance with Cole. "Mr. Mercer, you witnessed the confrontation last night. In your assessment, was Mr. Brennan attempting to kill Miss Hayes or simply intimidate her?" Cole's jaw tightened. "With that much gunfire, intent doesn't matter much. You shoot at a building knowing someone's inside, you're willing to accept their death as an outcome. Whether Brennan wanted Clara dead or just wanted to scare her into submission, he crossed the line. Before Matthews could respond, a commotion arose outside. Voices, sharp and urgent. One of the guards burst into the parlor. "Colonel, there's someone here demanding to see Miss Hayes. He claims to be her legal counsel." Matthews frowned. "Who?" "Theodore Carrington, sir. He's got papers." Clara's blood ran cold. "I don't have legal counsel. I've never even heard that name." "Brennan's move," Cole said grimly. "He's trying to use the law against you now that violence failed." "Show him in," Matthews ordered, "but keep guards present." The man who entered was everything Harold would choose. Well-dressed, confident, carrying a leather portfolio that spoke of expensive education and established practice. Theodore Carrington was perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of smooth competence that came from years of winning cases. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Ward and Miss Hayes." Carrington's smile was professionally warm. "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but I've been retained by Mr. Harold Brennan to ensure his stepdaughter receives proper legal representation in this unfortunate situation." "I don't want your representation," Clara said flatly. "With respect, Miss Hayes, you may not fully understand your legal position. Your stepfather has filed formal charges of theft, property damage, and defamation. These are serious matters that require proper counsel." "The only thief and defamer here is Harold Brennan," Mrs. Ward said sharply. Carrington turned his smooth smile on her. "Mrs. Ward, I understand you've taken an interest in this young woman, but you must realize that family disputes of this nature are best resolved privately through proper legal channels." "This isn't a family dispute," Cole interjected. "This is attempted murder and forced marriage." "Those are inflammatory accusations based entirely on the confused writings of a sick woman and the hysterical claims of a frightened girl." Carrington opened his portfolio and withdrew several documents. "I have here sworn statements from Dr. William Foster, who treated Mrs. Margaret Brennan during her final illness. He confirmed she died of natural causes, consumption complicated by heart failure. I also have statements from several respectable citizens of Kearney attesting to Mr. Brennan's character and his genuine concern for his stepdaughter's welfare." He laid the papers on the table with the air of a man playing a winning hand. Clara stared at them, feeling the trap closing. "The doctor was paid to say that," she said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak, unprovable. "That's a serious allegation." Carrington's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone hard. "Do you have evidence of this payment?" "I have my mother's letters." "Letters written during a period of mental decline, as confirmed by Dr. Foster's statement. I'm afraid they carry very little legal weight, Miss Hayes." Carrington settled into a chair uninvited, crossing his legs comfortably. "Now, here is what I propose. You return to your stepfather's care. The charges against you are dropped. You're given time to recover from this episode, perhaps a few weeks in the care of a qualified physician who can address your obvious distress. And then, if you still wish to refuse the advantageous marriage your stepfather has arranged, we can discuss alternatives." "No," Clara said. "I beg your pardon?" "No. I won't go back. I won't see a physician who will declare me insane because Harold's paying him. And I won't be silenced." Clara stood, her legs shaking but her voice growing stronger. "My mother was murdered. Harold Brennan poisoned her slowly over months. And then he tried to force me into a marriage that would ensure I could never speak about it. Those are the facts, regardless of what paid doctors and bought witnesses say." Carrington's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "Miss Hayes, you're making this very difficult. I'm trying to help you avoid serious legal consequences." "You're trying to help Harold Brennan cover up a murder," Mrs. Ward interrupted, "and we all know it." "Mrs. Ward, be very careful about making defamatory statements," Carrington warned. "They could land you in significant legal trouble." "Then add me to the list of people you're threatening," Cole said quietly. "Because I witnessed Brennan and his men attack this building last night with intent to kill or capture Miss Hayes. That's attempted kidnapping at minimum, attempted murder more likely. You witnessed armed men defending their employer's legal right to retrieve his ward, who had stolen property and fled unlawfully." Carrington's voice had gone cold. "Everything Mr. Brennan has done falls within his legal rights as Miss Hayes' guardian until such time as she marries or reaches the age of 25. "I'm 22, Clara said. "I have 3 more years before I'm free of him." "Under territorial law, yes. Unless you marry, of course. in which case guardianship transfers to your husband, which is precisely what Mr. Brennan has been trying to arrange for your benefit. The trap was complete. Clara could see it now, the careful legal web Harold had woven. As long as she remained unmarried, she was his property. If she married, she became her husband's property. Either way, she was never free. "There has to be another way," she whispered. "There is," Carrington said, his tone softening to false sympathy. "Come back. Accept your stepfather's care. In a few years, when you're of age, you can make your own choices. It's really very simple." "Simple," Clara repeated, "except that I'll be dead long before I reach 25, just like my mother." "Miss Hayes, these paranoid delusions are exactly why you need proper medical care." "They're not delusions." Claire's voice rose, breaking. "My mother wrote it all down. She knew what he was doing. She tried to tell someone, tried to get help, but no one would listen because Harold Brennan has money and influence and people like you willing to twist the law to protect him." The room had gone silent. Even Carrington seemed taken aback by the raw emotion in Clara's voice. Into that silence came the sound of boots on the porch, heavy, purposeful footsteps. The door opened and a man entered who commanded immediate attention, not through size or force, but through sheer presence. The territorial marshal was perhaps 60, lean and weathered, with gray hair and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore a long coat and a silver star, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent decades enforcing law in places where law was often more hope than reality. "I'm Marshal James Rawlins," he announced, his voice gravelly and direct. "And I'd appreciate it if everyone would sit down and be quiet while I figure out what in the hell is going on here." Colonel Matthews stood. "Marshal, we have a complicated situation. I can see that, Colonel. I've got statements from your men about a shooting last night, complaints filed by Harold Brennan about his missing stepdaughter, and rumors flying around this town like startled birds." Rawlins's gaze swept the room, settling on Clara. "You're the young woman at the center of this?" "Yes, sir. Clara Hayes." "And you're claiming your stepfather murdered your mother?" "I'm not claiming it. I'm stating it as fact." Rawlins studied her for a long moment. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Hayes. You ready to back it up?" Clara reached for the bundle of letters Mrs. Ward had kept safe. "These are letters my mother wrote before she died. They document everything. What Harold was doing to her, how he was poisoning her, why he was doing it. She wrote them intending to send them to someone for help, but she died before she could." The marshal took the letters and moved to the window, reading them in the morning light. The room waited in tense silence. Carrington looked confident. Cole looked wary. Mrs. Ward's face was set in determined lines. Clara just felt exhausted. After what seemed like an eternity, Rawlins looked up. "These are damning if they're genuine. But Mr. Carrington here, I assume you're representing Brennan? He's got a point about them being written by a sick woman. Alone, they might not hold up." Clara's heart sank. "However," Rawlins continued, "they're enough to warrant an investigation. A proper one." He turned to Carrington. "Where's your client?" "Mr. Brennan is at his ranch, recovering from the trauma of these false accusations." "His ranch, the one 5 miles outside of town where my deputies found an abandoned campsite this morning. That ranch." Rawlins' tone had gone flat. "Or is he somewhere else, hiding from the fact that he led an armed assault on a civilian building last night?" Carrington's smooth facade cracked. "Marshal, my client was defending his legal rights." "Your client committed multiple crimes last night, Counselor. Attempted kidnapping, assault with deadly weapons, destruction of property, and that's just from the preliminary reports." Rawlins handed the letters to one of his deputies. "Get these to the fort commander's office. Keep them secure. Then I want you to ride out to the Brennan Ranch and search it thoroughly." "Search for what?" Carrington demanded. "Evidence, medicine bottles, records, anything that might support these allegations." Rawlins looked at Clara. "Your mother died at the ranch?" "Yes, sir." "In her bedroom?" "That bedroom been changed since her death? Cleaned out? Redecorated?" Clara thought about it. Harold hadn't touched her mother's room, had kept it locked, in fact. She'd always assumed it was grief, but now... No, he locked the room, said he couldn't bear to go in there. "Interesting." Rawlins turned back to his deputy. "Search that bedroom especially carefully. Look for hidden items, loose floorboards, anything out of place." Marshal, this is highly irregular, Carrington protested. You can't just search a private residence without proper cause. I've got plenty of cause. Written testimony from a murder victim, armed assault by the accused, and a young woman's life potentially at stake. Rollins's eyes were cold. Now, unless you want to obstruct a federal investigation, I suggest you sit down and shut up while I do my job. Carrington's mouth opened, then closed. He sat. Miss Hayes, Rollins said, his tone gentling slightly, I need you to understand something. What you're doing here, accusing a prominent man of murder, it's dangerous. If you're wrong, or if we can't prove you're right, you'll face consequences. False accusations, defamation, possibly more. You sure you want to proceed? Clara thought about her mother's shaking handwriting, about the fear in those letters, about the slow, terrible death she'd been forced to watch, not understanding until too late what she was witnessing. I'm sure, she said firmly. Then I need your full statement. Everything you remember about your mother's illness, about Brennan's behavior, about the marriage arrangement, all of it. Rollins pulled out a notepad. And I need you to be completely honest. If you exaggerate or lie about anything, it'll poison the whole case. Understood? Understood. For the next 2 hours, Clara talked. She described her mother's gradual decline, the way Harold would bring her special teas and tonics that seemed to make her worse. She talked about finding the letters, about overhearing Harold's arrangement with Marcus Dawson, about her desperate flight through the storm. She described the men who'd hunted her, Cole's intervention, and the attack on the boarding house. Rollins listened without interruption, taking notes in cramped handwriting. Colonel Matthews added details about the shooting. Mrs. Ward confirmed what she knew of Margaret Brennan's final months. Cole corroborated everything about the confrontations and pursuit. By the time they finished, the sun was high and hot outside. Clara's throat was raw from talking, her emotions wrung out like a twisted rag. All right, Rollins said finally, closing his notepad. Here's what's going to happen. Miss Hayes, you're remaining under military protection at this boarding house until we complete our investigation. Mr. Carrington, you can inform your client that he is to present himself at the fort by sundown today. If he doesn't, I'm issuing a warrant for his arrest. On what charges? Carrington demanded. Attempted kidnapping for starters. We'll add more depending on what my deputies find at the ranch. Rollins stood, his joints cracking audibly. I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen men like Brennan before, men who think money and influence put them above the law. Sometimes they're right, but not today. Not in my jurisdiction. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Clara. One more thing, Miss Hayes. If Brennan doesn't show up by sundown, it'll tell me everything I need to know about his guilt. Innocent men don't run. After the marshal left, taking Carrington and most of the soldiers with him, Clara sagged in her chair. The adrenaline that had been sustaining her drained away all at once, leaving nothing but exhaustion. You did well, Mrs. Ward said softly, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. Very well. What if they don't find anything? Clara whispered. What if Harold destroyed all the evidence? Then we deal with that when it happens, Cole said. He'd moved to the window, watching the street. But Rollins is thorough. If there's evidence to find, he'll find it. The hours crawled by. Clara tried to rest, but couldn't. She paced her room, drank endless cups of tea, watched the sun track across the sky toward the horizon. Toward sundown. Toward the moment when Harold would have to choose, face the law or run. As the shadows lengthened, a soldier arrived with news. The deputies had returned from the Brennan ranch with evidence, multiple bottles of what appeared to be arsenic-laced medicine, records showing purchases of various poisons, and most damningly, a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Margaret Brennan's room. A journal in Harold's own handwriting, documenting doses and effects with the cold precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. Clara listened to the report in numb disbelief. He'd kept records. Harold had documented his own crime, unable to resist the impulse to note his success in slowly killing another human being. Why would he keep something like that? She asked. Arrogance, Marshal Rollins said. He'd returned to deliver the news personally. Men like Brennan think they're too smart to get caught. They document their crimes because they're proud of them, because they think they'll never face consequences. Has he surrendered himself? Rollins shook his head. Sundown's in 10 minutes. He's not coming.
So he ran. We'll find him. I've got men watching every road out of the territory. He won't get far. But Clara felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Harold hadn't run. He was coming. One last attempt to silence her, to destroy the evidence, to fix what his arrogance had broken. She looked at Cole and saw the same knowledge in his eyes. He's going to try again, she said quietly. I know. When? Cole glanced out the window at the dying light. Tonight. When he thinks we've let our guard down, when he thinks he has one final chance to end this before the law catches up with him. Marshal Rollins overheard the exchange. I'll double the guard, post men on every approach. Won't matter, Cole interrupted. Brennan knows this territory. He'll find a way. Question is, are we ready when he does? What are you suggesting? Rollins asked. Cole turned from the window, his expression set in hard lines. I'm suggesting we let him come. Set a trap.
End this tonight, one way or another. Clara's breath caught. You want to use me as bait. I want to give Brennan one last chance to make a mistake that puts him in chains forever. Cole's gray eyes met hers. But only if you're willing. This is your choice, Clara. Always has been. She thought about her mother, dying slowly in that locked room. She thought about the other women Harold might hurt if he escaped justice. She thought about living in fear for the rest of her life, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when he'd return. Do it, she said. Whatever it takes. Let's finish this. Rollins looked between them, then nodded slowly. All right. But we do this my way. Military precision. No one takes unnecessary risks. As the sun set and darkness claimed Fort Kearney, soldiers moved into position around the boarding house. Lanterns were lit in Clara's window, making it clear she was there. The guards were pulled back, made less visible, creating the illusion of reduced security. And in the darkness beyond the town, Harold Brennan made his final approach, driven by desperation and rage, walking straight into the trap that would seal his fate forever. The endgame had begun. Clara sat in the darkened room, the lantern on her table casting long shadows against the walls. Cole stood near the door, his rifle cradled in his arms, his posture relaxed but alert. Below, the boarding house was silent as a held breath. Soldiers waited in the shadows. In the alley, behind the neighboring buildings, tucked into doorways where darkness pooled deepest, waiting for Harold Brennan to make his final mistake. You don't have to stay in here, Cole said quietly. We could put a dummy in the chair, make it look like you from outside. No, Claire's voice was steady. If Harold's going to risk everything to come after me, the least I can do is be here to face him. I'm done hiding. Cole studied her in the dim light. You've changed since that first night at the cabin. Have I? Clara looked down at her hands, remembering how they'd trembled when she knocked on his door. Now they were still. Or maybe I'm just finally becoming who I was supposed to be before fear made me small. Your mother would be proud of you. The words hit Clara like a benediction. Her throat tightened, but she pushed the emotion down. There would be time for tears later when this was over. I hope so. I hope she's... Clara stopped, changing direction. I hope she knows I'm doing this for her. An hour passed, then another. The night deepened. Clara's nerves stretched tighter with each passing minute. The waiting was almost worse than action would be. Then Cole stiffened. Movement. Back alley. 2 men. Clara's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. Is it him? Can't tell yet, but someone's testing our defenses. Cole moved to the window, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen from outside. They're checking sight lines, professional work. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Cole's hand went to his revolver, but then Mrs. Ward's voice came softly up the stairs. It's me. Marshall's here. Rollins entered the room a moment later, moving with surprising quiet for a man his age. We've spotted activity on 3 sides of the building. Brennan brought help. Looks like he hired guns from outside Kearney. 4 of them that we can see, maybe more in reserve. He's not taking chances, Cole observed. Neither are we. My men have them in crossfire positions. The moment Brennan shows himself and makes a move on this building, we take them all. Rollins looked at Clara. You holding up all right, Miss Hayes? I'm ready for this to be over. Should be soon now. The marshal moved to the window beside Cole, peering carefully around the frame. Question is whether Brennan's smart enough to sense the trap or desperate enough not to care. The answer came 10 minutes later. A voice called out from the darkness, Harold's voice, controlled and cold. "Clara, I know you're in there. I know you're listening." Clara moved toward the window, but Cole's hand on her arm stopped her.
"Don't let him see you yet," he whispered. "There's no escape from this," Harold continued. "The marshal thinks he's clever, thinks he's got me cornered, but he's forgotten something important. I still have friends. Important friends. Friends who can make all of this disappear if you'll just be reasonable." "He's stalling," Rollins muttered. "Looking for an opening? Clara, you're my daughter in the eyes of the law. Come out now, come back home, and I promise you'll be treated fairly. We can say this was all a misunderstanding. You were distraught over your mother's death, not thinking clearly. No one needs to be hurt." Cole's jaw tightened. He's trying to sound reasonable for the witnesses, building a case that he tried diplomacy first. "I don't want his diplomacy," Clara said. She moved to the window before Cole could stop her and called out, "I'm not your daughter, Harold, and I'm never coming back to that ranch." Silence. Then Harold's voice came again, all pretense of warmth gone. "Then you're choosing your fate, Clara. Remember that. What happens next is on you." "No," Clara called back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "What happens next is on you. You murdered my mother. You tried to force me into marriage to cover it up. You attacked this building with armed men. Every choice that led to this moment was yours." "You ungrateful!" Harold's control slipped, rage bleeding through. "I gave you everything. A home, security, a future. And this is how you repay me? You gave me a prison. You took away the only person I loved, and you expected me to thank you for it." Clara's hands gripped the window frame. "But I'm not thanking you, Harold. I'm ending you." The words seemed to echo in the darkness. Then Harold laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you've won? You think the law will protect you? I've been playing this game longer than you've been alive, little girl. I always find a way."
Not this time," Marshal Rollins called out, his voice carrying authority. "Harold Brennan, you're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Brennan and multiple counts of assault. Order your men to stand down and surrender yourself." "Or what? You'll shoot?" Harold's voice was mocking. "I don't think so, Marshal. Not with Clara in that building. Not with civilian casualties at stake. You're a lawman. You have rules. I don't." What happened next came with terrible speed. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, not at the boarding house, but at the soldiers' positions. Harold's hired guns had spotted the trap and were trying to create chaos, to open an escape route. Soldiers returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like lightning. "Get down!" Cole shoved Clara to the floor as a bullet shattered the window above them, glass raining down in glittering shards. More gunfire, shouting, the thunder of boots on wood. Cole was up and moving, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Clara and the door. "Stay low! Don't move unless I tell you to!" Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was it, the final confrontation. Everything would be decided in the next few minutes. Downstairs, she heard the front door crash open. Mrs. Ward's shotgun boomed once, twice. A man screamed, more boots on the stairs, heavy, running. Cole aimed at the doorway. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't wearing a uniform, they're not leaving alive," he said quietly, more to himself than to Clara. But the footsteps stopped just outside. Then Harold's voice came, closer now, just beyond the door. "Cole Mercer, the hero, the savior. You think you're protecting her, but all you're doing is getting her killed." "Come through that door and find out," Cole replied evenly. "I don't need to come through the door." There was a strange sound, scraping, like metal on metal. "I just need you to make a choice." Then Clara smelled it. Smoke. "He's set fire to the hallway," Cole said, his voice tight. "Son of a—" "So here's your choice, Mercer," Harold called through the door. "Die in the fire or come out shooting. Either way, this ends tonight." The smoke was already thickening, seeping under the door. Clara could hear the crackle of flames, could feel the temperature rising. Cole moved to the window and looked down. It's a 12-foot drop to the alley.
You'd break something, but you'd live. What about you? I'll go through the door, clear a path for the soldiers to put out the fire. That's suicide. He'll be waiting. I know. Cole's gray eyes met hers in the flickering light from the flames beyond the door. But it's the only play that keeps you alive. No. Clara stood, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. There has to be another way. There isn't, not this time. Cole moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Clara, listen to me. After this is over, after they arrest Brennan, you take his ranch and you sell it. Take the money and build yourself a life far away from here. Forget about me, forget about all of this, and just live. You understand? Cole, don't. Promise me. Clara stared at him, this man who'd stepped back when she was afraid, who'd spent 2 days earning her trust, who was now ready to die to keep her safe. And she realized with stunning clarity that she couldn't let him do this alone. I promise, she lied. Then she grabbed the water pitcher from the washstand and threw its contents on the door, buying them seconds. But not like this. We go together or not at all. Cole opened his mouth to argue, but Clara was already moving. She grabbed the blanket from the bed, soaked it with the rest of the water from the basin, and wrapped it around her shoulders. You go first. I'll be right behind you. And Cole, don't you dare die on me. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe respect, maybe something deeper. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Clara coughed again, the smoke getting thicker. But that's my choice to make. Now open that door before we both burn. Cole kicked the door open. Flames had consumed the hallway. Not completely, but enough to create a wall of heat and smoke. Through the fire, Clara could see Harold at the far end, near the stairs, his gun drawn. He'd expected Cole to come out alone, expected to have a clear shot. He hadn't expected Clara to be right behind him. Cole fired first, his shot forcing Harold to dive for cover. Then they were running, crashing through the flames, the wet blanket protecting Clara from the worst of the heat. The hallway was chaos, smoke, fire, the sounds of fighting from downstairs. They made it to the stairs. Harold rose from his cover, his gun coming up. Time seemed to slow. Clara saw the hatred in her stepfather's eyes, saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw the muzzle swinging toward Cole. She didn't think. She just moved. Clara slammed into Cole from the side, knocking him off balance. The shot that would have hit him went wide, splintering the wall behind them. They tumbled down the stairs in a tangle of limbs, hitting the landing hard. When Clara looked up, dizzy and disoriented, she saw Harold descending toward them, his gun aimed directly at her now. You should have stayed afraid, he said coldly. Fear kept you alive. Fear kept me small, Clara replied. I'm done being small. The shotgun blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Harold jerked backward, the gun falling from his hand. He looked down at his chest in disbelief, then up at Mrs. Ward, who stood in the parlor doorway with her smoking shotgun. That's for my daughter, Mrs. Ward said quietly. And for Margaret. Harold collapsed, blood spreading across the floor. Soldiers poured into the building, some fighting the fire, others securing the hired guns who'd either been captured or killed in the firefight outside. Marshal Rollins appeared through the smoke, taking in the scene with grim satisfaction. Harold Brennan, you're under arrest for... He paused, seeing the wound. Well, you're under arrest anyway, assuming the doctor can keep you alive long enough to hang. Clara sat on the floor coughing, her ears ringing from the gunshot. Cole pulled himself up beside her, checking her for injuries. You all right? Did you get burned? I don't think so. You? I'm fine. His hands were shaking slightly as they moved over her arms, her shoulders, reassuring himself she was intact. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen someone do. You were going to sacrifice yourself, Clara pointed out. That's different. How? Cole didn't have an answer for that. He just pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her tightly. Clara could feel his heart hammering, could feel the tremor in his muscles that spoke of adrenaline and fear finally releasing. They sat there in the smoke-filled hallway while soldiers put out the fire and medics attended to Harold's wound. The man who'd controlled Clara's life for 5 years lay unconscious, handcuffed to a stretcher, his power broken, at last. It was over.
3 days later, Clara stood outside the courthouse in Kearney, watching as they loaded Harold Brennan into a prison wagon. He'd survived his wound, which meant he'd live long enough to stand trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the journal, the poison, the testimony of multiple witnesses. His lawyer had already advised him to plead guilty in hopes of avoiding the gallows. Harold would spend the rest of his life in prison. It wasn't death, but it was justice. "How are you feeling?" Cole asked, standing beside her. Clara thought about the question. "Strange. I spent so long being afraid of him, and now he just looks small, pathetic." "That's because you're seeing him clearly for the first time. Fear has a way of making monsters look bigger than they are." They watched the wagon roll away, taking Harold Brennan out of Clara's life forever. Then Marshal Rollins approached, holding a sheaf of papers. "Miss Hayes, I've got some documents here for you to sign. The court has ruled that Harold Brennan's guardianship over you is dissolved, effective immediately. You're legally independent." "What about the ranch?" "That's more complicated. It was jointly owned by your mother and Brennan. With him going to prison, his half will be seized by the territory. Your mother's half passes to you as her heir. You can buy out the territory's share if you want, or sell your interest to them." Rollins handed her the papers. "You've got options, is what I'm saying. Real options." Clara took the documents, still processing the reality of freedom. "What happened to Marcus Dawson?" "He's been questioned. Claims he didn't know anything about your mother's murder, that the marriage arrangement was just business. Can't prove otherwise, so he's walking free." Rollins' expression darkened. "But word's gotten around about what kind of man he is. His business is suffering. Sometimes social justice works when legal justice can't." After the marshal left, Cole and Clara walked back toward Mrs. Ward's boarding house. The building had been repaired, the bullet holes patched, the fire damage restored. It looked almost normal, as if the violence of that night had been a fever dream. "What will you do now?" Cole asked. Clara had been thinking about that question for 3 days. "Mrs. Ward suggested I could stay here, work at the boarding house while I figure things out. Learn some skills, save some money." "That's a good plan." Or, Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "I could sell my interest in the ranch like you suggested, take the money and go somewhere new, Denver maybe, or San Francisco. Start completely over." Cole's expression was carefully neutral. "That's a good plan too. Except I don't want to forget about you. You told me to forget about all of this, but Cole, you're not part of the trauma. You're part of the healing." Clara took a breath, gathering her courage. "These past few days, lying awake at night, I kept thinking about what matters. And what matters isn't running away from the past. It's choosing the future I want. A future where I'm not alone, where I'm not afraid, where I'm with someone who sees me as an equal, not property." Cole was very still. "Clara, you don't owe me anything," Clara continued quickly. "You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. If you want to go back to riding route, living alone in that cabin, I understand. But if there's any chance that you want something different, something more, then I'm asking you to consider it. Consider me. Not as someone you saved, but as someone choosing you freely." The silence stretched. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd laid herself bare, vulnerable in a way that terrified her more than facing Harold ever had. This was the risk of hope, the danger of wanting something good. Then Cole smiled. A real smile. Not the small half-expressions she'd seen before, but something full and genuine that transformed his face. "Clara Hayes, are you asking me to court you?" "I'm asking if you'd want to, if the idea of building a life with someone appeals to you, if maybe you're tired of being alone." Clara's voice wavered. "If maybe you feel what I feel." Cole reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "I spent 8 years wishing I could go back and save my sister, wishing I could have been there when she needed someone. And then you knocked on my door in the middle of a storm, and it was like getting a second chance. A chance to do right, to stand for something that mattered." "I know, and I'm grateful. Let me finish." Cole squeezed her hand. It started as obligation, doing the right thing because it needed doing. But Clara, somewhere between that cabin and this moment, it became about you. Not about Anna, not about redemption or guilt, just you. The way you kept fighting even when you were terrified. The way you stood up to Brennan when anyone else would have crumbled. The way you pushed me down those stairs, and took that bullet that was meant for me. His gray eyes were intense, holding hers. So yes, I want to court you. I want to build a life with you. And I want you to know that I'm choosing you too, freely, because you're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever met. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, maybe years, they were tears of joy, not fear. I was so afraid you'd say no. I was afraid you'd only want me because I happened to be there, because I was convenient or safe, or because you felt obligated. Cole brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. But this choice you're making with clear eyes and no pressure, this means everything. So what happens now? Cole considered. Well, I've got a cabin that could use a woman's touch. It's remote, but it's peaceful. Good land around it. Could build a real home there if someone wanted to. I might know someone who wants to, Clara said, unable to stop smiling. And I've been thinking about maybe training horses, breeding them, selling them to the cavalry. It's steadier work than riding route, and it's something I could do from one place. That sounds wonderful. Plus, there's this boarding house in Fort Kearney run by a formidable woman who might need someone to handle repairs and security. Could spend part of the year here, helping her out, being part of a community. Clara laughed. You've thought this all through. Had 3 days of watching you sleep to think about it. Cole's expression grew serious again. But Clara, I need you to understand something. I'm not an easy man. I've got history, demons I'm still working through. I wake up some nights thinking I'm back in battles that ended years ago. I'm quiet when maybe I should talk more. I'm not educated or sophisticated like the men you could meet in Denver or San Francisco. I don't want educated or sophisticated. I want honest. I want kind. I want someone who steps back when I'm afraid and steps forward when I need protection. I want you, Cole Mercer. All of you, including the demons and the quiet. Cole pulled her close then, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Clara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and soap and safety. How long? She asked. How long until we can get married? You want to rush into that? After everything with Brennan trying to force you? I'm not rushing. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Clara looked up at him. But I also don't need to rush. We can take whatever time we need. I just want to know that it's real, that it's possible. It's real, Cole assured her. And it's possible. But let's do this right. Court properly, give you time to heal from everything that's happened. Give us both time to be sure. I'm already sure. I know, but humor me anyway. So they did it properly. Cole rented a room at Mrs. Ward's boarding house and spent his days helping repair the building and his evenings sitting in the parlor with Clara, talking about everything and nothing. They took walks through Fort Kearney, attended socials at the fort, became a familiar sight together. Mrs. Ward watched over them with the fierce protectiveness of a mother hen, but she also gave them space to learn each other, to discover preferences and quirks, to navigate disagreements, to build the foundation of something lasting. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Clara Hayes married Cole Mercer in a small ceremony at the Fort Chapel. Mrs. Ward stood as witness, along with Marshal Rollins and Colonel Matthews. It was simple and perfect, and everything Clara had never known she wanted. They spent their first year between Cole's cabin and Fort Kearney, building a horse breeding operation that quickly gained a reputation for quality animals and fair dealing. Clara discovered she had a gift for training horses, for understanding their personalities and earning their trust, skills, Cole pointed out with amusement, that she'd probably learned from dealing with frightened people. The ranch that had been her mother's was sold to a family from the east, good people who wanted to farm the land properly. Clara took her share of the proceeds and invested it in the horse operation, in improvements to Mrs. Ward's boarding house, and in a fund she established to help women escaping dangerous situations. Margaret Hayes Memorial Fund, she called it. Her mother's legacy transformed from tragedy into hope. Harold Brennan died in prison 2 years after his conviction, his health broken by confinement and guilt. Clara felt nothing when she heard the news. No satisfaction, no grief, just a distant acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Marcus Dawson lost his business and left the territory under a cloud of scandal. Clara never saw him again. Dutch Reynolds came by the cabin one day, hat in hand, to apologize for hunting her. "I was just following orders," he said. "But that don't make it right." Clara accepted his apology and offered him a job training security horses. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she told him, "even men who make mistakes." Dutch worked for them for 5 years before retiring, and he never gave them reason to regret the opportunity. On a summer evening 3 years after their wedding, Clara stood on the porch of their cabin, no longer Cole's cabin, but theirs, watching the sun set over land they'd built together. The horse operation was thriving. They had contracts with the cavalry, and they'd just learned Clara was pregnant with their first child. Cole came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That night in the storm, when I knocked on your door. Worst storm I've ever seen. Best thing that ever happened to me." Clara leaned back against him, secure in his embrace. "I was so afraid. Of you, of the storm, of everything. And you said you'd earn my trust. And did I?" "You did. You still do, every single day." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for stepping back when I needed space, and thank you for stepping forward when I needed strength." "That's what partners do," Cole said simply. "We figure out what the other needs, and we provide it. Not because we have to, but because we want to." "I love you," Clara said. 3 words she spoke freely now, without fear of vulnerability or rejection. "I love you too," Cole replied, the words still coming awkwardly but sincerely from a man who'd spent so many years alone. They stood together as darkness fell. 2 people who'd found each other in a storm and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Clara was no longer the frightened girl who'd whispered, "I'm afraid of you." She was a woman who'd faced her fears, claimed her freedom, and chosen her future. And that future, she thought as Cole's hand rested gently on her stomach where their child grew, looked bright indeed. The woman who'd once run through a storm alone now stood beside someone who'd promised to earn her trust. And every day, in 1,000 small ways, he kept that promise. That was the story Clara would tell their daughter when she was old enough to understand. That was the legacy she would pass down, not one of fear or survival, but of choice and courage, and the transformative power of trust freely given and carefully kept. She'd been afraid once, but fear had taught her strength, and strength had led her home.